His name was Marcus Reed, 32 years old. Every morning he woke up to the same alarm, 5:30 a.m. sharp. Not because he had to be at work that early, but because the world had taught Marcus one thing: you have to work twice as hard to be seen half as much. He ironed his blue polo shirt carefully, pressing the collar down as if neatness could shield him from judgment. He tied his shoes with deliberate patience, and finally he picked up the small piece of plastic that defined him to the world, his name tag. It was simple, white letters on a blue background. Marcus, Cashier. To most customers it was nothing, just a label, just a way to call him without ever really knowing him. But to Marcus, that name tag wasn't just fabric. It was a mask, a shield, a reminder of the invisible line he walked every single day. Because behind the register, Marcus wasn't only scanning groceries, he was scanning faces. Faces that judged before they listened, faces that decided his worth before he spoke a single word. The grocery store smelled of detergent and coffee beans. The floors shined, polished so bright they reflected every fluorescent light above. Row after row of shelves stretched endlessly, stacked with bread, cereal, and canned goods. But Marcus's battlefield wasn't the aisles, it was lane 6, his register. From that spot, he had learned the rhythm of humanity. The tired mother with coupons, the businessman tapping his foot impatiently, the teenager hiding beer under snacks. And then there were the others, the ones who didn't see Marcus at all. Racism, Marcus knew, rarely came with screaming or fists. It came with glances. The woman who shifted her purse closer the moment she reached his line. The man who counted his change twice, convinced Marcus had shorted him. The customer who asked for the manager, even though Marcus had just explained the same policy. It was always subtle, always disguised as something else, but Marcus felt it. Every sideways glance, every heavy sigh, every unspoken accusation, like tiny cuts on the same wound, reopening every single day. And yet, Marcus smiled, always smiled, because the world had taught him that for a black man behind a counter, silence was survival. When Marcus was a boy, his mother told him, "Son, they'll try to break you. They'll try to make you feel small, but don't ever let them see you lose yourself. You don't fight them with fists. You fight them by standing tall, even when your back aches." Marcus carried those words with him. Every scan of a barcode, every forced smile, every "have a nice day" to someone who wouldn't even look him in the eye. But there was something else behind that name tag, a truth that no one at the grocery store knew. Marcus had once dreamed of being a teacher. He loved books, loved the way words could reshape a person's mind, but life didn't hand him that chance. Bills piled up, his father's health declined, opportunities slipped away. And so Marcus found himself here, 32 years old, in a blue polo with a name tag that told strangers his name but erased his story. But the truth was this: that name tag was never meant to define him. It was meant to test him. Because Marcus Reed was not just a cashier. He was a man carrying generations of survival in his veins. A man whose quiet strength would one day roar so loud, the world could no longer ignore him. But before that roar could come, Marcus would have to endure the silence, the whispers, the stares, the weight of being seen but never truly known. And so behind Register 6 began the story of a man who refused to be broken. They didn't need to say a word. Marcus knew the language of glances. It was the look that slid over him when he spoke too confidently, the squint of suspicion when he handled cash, the frozen smile that said, "I don't trust you, but I'll pretend I do." To most customers, these were nothing, fleeting expressions in a busy day. But Marcus had lived with them his entire life, and he had learned to read them the way others read books. A woman's heels click across the floor. She places items on the conveyor belt. Take the woman with the pearls. Every Wednesday afternoon, she came in. Bread, milk, 2 bottles of sparkling water. She never looked Marcus in the eye. She stared just above his head, like acknowledging him would cost her something. And when Marcus handed her the receipt, she snatched it quickly. Every time, as though his fingers were dangerous. It was never spoken, never direct, but Marcus could feel the invisible wall between them, not built of bricks, built of history, built of wounds too deep for bandages. Then there was the businessman, expensive suit, gold watch, always in a rush. He'd tap his card down impatiently, eyes darting as if Marcus wasn't moving fast enough. And every time when the receipt printed, he checked the total twice, as if Marcus the cashier, was waiting for his one chance to steal from him. Marcus would smile. He would say, "Thank you, sir. Have a good evening." But inside, something burned, because it wasn't just groceries they were buying. It was dignity they were taking, piece by piece. Marcus remembered being 10 years old, standing in a corner store, clutching a candy bar. The clerk watched him like a hawk, eyes sharp, ready to accuse. He remembered the sting of his mother's hand pulling him close. "Keep your hands where they can see them, Marcus," she whispered. "Doesn't matter if you're innocent. To them, you'll always have to prove it." That lesson followed him into adulthood, into the aisles, into lane 6, into every exchange where his skin was weighed before his words. But Marcus wasn't bitter. He couldn't afford to be. Instead, he became an expert at masks, a master of calm tones, gentle nods, and steady hands. He told himself, "If I stay composed, if I stay polite, maybe the storm will pass." Yet the storm never passed. It only hid in the glances. The father who pulled his child a little closer as Marcus scanned the groceries. The teenager who smirked, whispering a word Marcus had heard too many times before. The older man who said, "You speak so well," as if intelligence was unexpected, as if respect was something Marcus had to earn twice over. It wore on him, not in big explosions, but in small daily cuts, like paper slices across the soul. You barely notice at first, but over time you bleed. You bleed patience, you bleed hope, you bleed the belief that one day things might be different. And Marcus was bleeding. But even in those moments, there was resilience, because every time he wanted to lash out, he thought of his younger brother, a boy just 17, wide-eyed, watching, learning from Marcus what it meant to survive in a world that measured you unfairly. Marcus knew, if he cracked, his brother would see it. If he gave up, his brother might too. So Marcus endured the glances, he endured the sighs, he endured the weight of being doubted every time he reached for change. But what no one knew, not the woman with the pearls, not the man with the gold watch, not the father pulling his child closer, was that Marcus was not just standing at a register. He was standing on a battlefield, and every smile, every "have a good day," every act of composure was resistance. It was survival. It was proof that they could not strip away his humanity, no matter how many glances they threw at him. Because Marcus knew a glance could wound. But it could not break him. Not yet. Marcus had survived the glances, the whispers, the constant hum of doubt wrapped around his skin like chains. But no chain holds forever. And every man, no matter how resilient, has a breaking point. A rainy evening. Customers shuffle in, wet umbrellas shaking, kids whining. Marcus is at lane 6, scanning items quickly but politely. It was a Thursday night. Rain tapping against the windows, impatient feet tracking mud across the tiles. The kind of evening where tempers ran short. Marcus was tired. His shift was already 12 hours long, and his manager had just asked him to stay an extra 2, because you're the only one I can count on, which Marcus knew really meant, you're the one who won't complain. A man steps forward, groceries clattering onto the belt. His voice is sharp. Then came the man, suit rumpled, face flushed from the storm, eyes already full of anger. He tossed his groceries onto the belt as if daring them to break. Marcus greeted him gently. "Good evening, sir?" But the man didn't respond. Instead, he leaned on the counter, watching Marcus with a glare that cut. As Marcus scanned the items, milk, bread, a 6-pack of beer, he felt the weight of the man's stare. Not just impatience, something deeper, something uglier. When Marcus handed him the total, the man's voice finally broke the silence. The customer said, "Figures. Bet you added a little extra, huh? You people always do." A hush falls. The sound of carts and chatter dims as if the store itself is holding its breath. Marcus froze, not because the words were new, but because they were spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. The air thickened. Shoppers turned, curious eyes peering over carts. A mother pulled her child closer. An older woman shook her head, whispering. And Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest. He remembered his mother's voice again. "Keep your hands where they can see them, Marcus. Doesn't matter if you're innocent. They'll paint you guilty anyway." So he smiled, thin, fragile, and said, "Your total is correct, sir. Would you like a bag?" But the man leaned closer, his breath sour, his tone venom. The customer said, "Don't get smart with me. I know what you people are like lazy, crooked, always trying to take what isn't yours. The words hit harder than the rain outside, harder than the long hours, harder than all the glances combined, because it wasn't just an insult, it was a confirmation of every suspicion, every whisper, every shadow Marcus had endured. And it was public. It was humiliation, nailed into him before an audience. His hands shook. For the first time in years, he wanted to slam the register shut, throw the man's groceries back at him, and scream. Scream that he was tired. Scream that he was human. Scream that he was not their scapegoat, not their stereotype, not their enemy. Silence, then the sound of a deep breath. But Marcus didn't scream. He stood there, his pulse pounding in his temples, his throat tight with swallowed fire. And then another voice. From the line behind the man, the woman said, "Hey, that's enough. Don't talk to him like that." Marcus turned slightly. It was a young woman, light-skinned, hair tied back, eyes blazing with anger. She stepped forward, glaring at the man. The woman said, "He's doing his job. Leave him alone." The man scoffed, rolled his eyes, but the spell was broken. People were watching differently now, not with curiosity, but with judgment, at him. The man muttered something under his breath, shoved a crumpled bill toward Marcus, grabbed his groceries, and stormed out into the rain. The automatic doors hissed shut behind him. Marcus stood still, heart racing, hands trembling around the bill he hadn't yet placed in the drawer. For the first time, someone had spoken. Not him, someone else. And in that moment, Marcus realized just how close he had come to breaking. Because strength isn't endless. Even resilience has limits. And Marcus had brushed against his. But instead of collapsing, he felt something stir. Not just anger, not just exhaustion, something new, a question. How many more times will I swallow my pain in silence? How long before I stop letting them decide who I am? That night, when Marcus walked home through the rain, the city lights blurry in the puddles at his feet, he knew this wasn't just another day. This was the beginning of something. A crack in the mask he had worn too long, and through that crack, a new fire was starting to burn. Because if life was going to keep pushing him toward a breaking point, then maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop breaking quietly. Marcus walked home with rain clinging to his shoulders, each droplet heavy like the words he couldn't shake. The man's insults replayed in his head, over and over, like a broken record. But what cut deeper wasn't the insult itself. It was the silence. His own silence. For years, Marcus had prided himself on staying calm, on keeping peace, on surviving without making waves. But that night, standing in front of his register, he'd felt it, the urge to fight back, and it terrified him. Sound of keys jangling, door creaking open, a small, modest apartment, the hum of a fridge, silence. At home, the silence was worse. Marcus lived alone. No laughter, no warmth waiting when he walked through the door, just the sound of his thoughts. And his thoughts were loud. He sat on the couch, clothes still damp from the storm, staring at the wall, hands still trembling. And for the first time in years, he whispered aloud. Marcus said, "Why me? Why do I always just take it?" Marcus thought about his father, how the man had worked long hours at a factory, only to come home, shoulders slumped, too tired to smile. How racism had chipped away at him silently until there was nothing left but weariness. Marcus had sworn not to be like him. He had sworn to be stronger. But now, sitting alone in the dark, he wondered if strong had just meant silent. The next morning, Marcus clocked in. The store looked the same. Rows of cereal, humming freezers, squeaky carts, but something had changed. When he walked past his coworkers, whispers followed. He didn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. He knew what they were about. "Did you see last night? That guy went off on him." Wonder what Marcus said to set him off. Marcus kept his head down, scanned, bagged, smiled, but each smile was thinner than the last. Then came the call. "Marcus, can you step into my office?" His manager sat behind a desk piled with papers, her tone rehearsed. The manager said, "Marcus, look, you know we value you here, but what happened last night caused disruption. We can't have scenes like that at the register." Marcus blinked. Disruption? He hadn't said a word. He had been insulted, humiliated, and yet, here he was, being warned. Marcus said, "I didn't do anything. He came at me." But his manager only sighed. "Doesn't matter. Perception is everything. Just try to keep things smooth from now on, all right?" That was the moment Marcus realized. In their eyes, he was not just a cashier. He was a liability, a risk to manage, a problem to contain, and the anger that had been swelling in his chest deepened. That night, Marcus didn't go straight home. He wandered, through streets glowing with neon, past restaurants filled with laughter he couldn't join, past couples holding hands, children tugging at coats, life moving on without him. And he thought, what would happen if he stopped holding back? What would happen if he told the truth, spoke the words he'd swallowed his whole life? Would anyone listen? Or would they only see an angry black man? The consequences weren't just whispers. They weren't just warnings. They were cracks forming inside Marcus himself, cracks between who he pretended to be and who he really was. And cracks only widened with time. That night, he did something he hadn't done since he was a boy. He wrote, page after page, every insult, every glance, every wound. He poured them out like poison, spilling them onto paper until his hand ached. And for the first time, Marcus realized, maybe silence wasn't strength. Maybe silence was killing him. The confrontation had left scars. It had shaken his job, his confidence, his identity. But it had also awakened something, a voice, small at first, but growing. And Marcus knew if he ignored it now, he would lose himself forever. The consequences weren't just about what happened in the store. They were about what happened next. Because Marcus had a choice, to keep surviving or to begin living. And the cost of that choice would change everything. Marcus's journal grew thicker with each night, page after page filled with memories, the ones he had buried for years. The man in the store was not the first. He was not the worst. Marcus remembered being 13, standing in a convenience shop with his friends, when the cashier followed them down every aisle, eyes narrowed, as though their skin itself was a crime. He remembered college, handing over his card at a restaurant, and watching the waiter double-check his ID as if Marcus Johnson couldn't possibly belong to someone like him. He remembered job interviews, the tight smiles, the polite dismissals, the walls he never saw until he crashed into them. And now, this latest wound, a reminder that no matter how much he smiled, no matter how patient, the world could still strip him bare in seconds. But something was different now. Marcus was tired, not just in his bones, but in his soul. And so one night, staring at the words he had written, he whispered aloud, "No more." The next day, Marcus returned to the store. Same aisles, same carts, same faces. But this time, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't louder. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. But when the first customer muttered under their breath, Marcus looked them directly in the eye. No smile, no apology, just silence and presence. And in that silence, the customer looked away first. It was small, so small. But to Marcus, it was everything. For the first time, he hadn't shrunk. He hadn't folded. He hadn't made himself smaller to keep others comfortable. For the first time, he stood in his skin and refused to move. But standing tall came with risk. In the break room, whispers grew louder. Some coworkers stopped talking when he walked in. Others stared just a little too long. Marcus could feel it, the weight of being watched, the risk of being labeled. But then something unexpected happened. One of the newer cashiers, a young woman named Alicia, pulled him aside after their shift. Her voice was quiet, nervous. Alicia said, "I saw what you did today, standing up like that. I needed to see that. Thank you." Marcus blinked. Thank you. Two simple words. But they hit him harder than any insult, because for the first time, he realized he wasn't just standing for himself. Others were watching. Others were learning. Others were waiting for someone to show them it was possible. And maybe, just maybe, his voice could be louder than his silence. That night, Marcus didn't go straight home. He walked through the city, watching faces, listening to voices, and he thought about the choice he had made, how fragile it was, how dangerous it felt, but how necessary. He remembered his father's silence, his exhaustion, the weight he carried to the grave, and Marcus swore, "I will not end like that." The turning point wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even a moment the world would notice. It was small, quiet. But inside Marcus, it was a revolution. He had tested his voice, and it had not broken him. For the first time, Marcus believed in the possibility of change. And though the road ahead would be long, this was the step that would carry him forward. Marcus had turned, not away from pain, not away from struggle, but toward himself. And that, for a man who had been silent his whole life, was everything. Marcus's life had become a cycle, a carousel that never stopped spinning. Day after day behind the counter, day after day wearing the mask. That mask, the smile that wasn't a smile, the calm voice when rage thundered in his chest. It was the mask every black worker knew well, because Marcus had learned early, in his world, the wrong tone could cost you a paycheck, and the wrong reaction, it could cost you your freedom. But even masks crack, even silence breaks. At first he didn't notice them. He had learned to tune out the noise. But then came the words, sharp, mocking, deliberate. Customer 1, "Hey, don't drop those, boy. Wouldn't want massa to whip ya." "Yo, get a pic of this." Black cashier in his natural habitat. They raise their phone, pretending to film. One even makes whipping sounds with his belt. The laughter stabs the silence. Something inside Marcus cracked open. Not anger, not yet. It was exhaustion. It was the memory of every insult, every side eye, every time he swallowed his pride to keep a job, every time he stayed quiet because bills didn't care about dignity. He dropped the box he was holding. The crash echoed through the aisle. And for the first time in years, Marcus raised his voice. Marcus, trembling at first. "You think this is funny? You walk in here like I'm some kind of joke, like my skin is your entertainment? Nah, not today." The boys stop laughing. A few customers turn their heads. The store manager peeks around the corner. For a split second, silence swallowed the store whole. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, thudding against his ribs like a drum of war. The manager said, "You can't do that. Not here. You let it slide. Always. Don't you dare cause trouble in my store." Trouble. That word tasted bitter, because in America, trouble didn't always mean wrong. It meant visible. It meant refusing to stay invisible. Marcus looked at his manager, a man who'd never once stood up for him, a man who counted profits but not pain. Marcus quietly said, "You want me silent, but silence is killing me." Later that night, Marcus at home, pacing. His hands shake as he replays the moment again and again. The confrontation lit something inside him, a flame he couldn't smother. But with the fire came fear. Would they fire him? Would they mark him angry black man? Would this be the end of the only job keeping the lights on? He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice that had been slipped under his door weeks before. The bills stacked high, the refrigerator nearly empty, and still, all he could think about was the look in those boys' eyes, mocking him, filming him, turning his pain into their punchline. He picks up his pen, the journal again, his handwriting jagged, rushed. Marcus' words, "They want me broken, they want me bent, they want me quiet. But what if my voice is the only thing I have left?" He didn't plan to speak. He just wanted to listen. But as the stories poured out, black mothers describing their sons harassed by police, a young girl explaining how she's followed in stores, an old man recalling segregation like it was yesterday, Marcus felt his throat tighten. His story wasn't unique. It was a chorus, a wound shared across generations. And when the microphone passed to him, his hands shook, his chest ached, but he lifted it anyway. "My name is Marcus. I work as a cashier, and every day I feel like I'm fighting to prove I'm even human." The room falls silent. Someone nods. Another wipes tears. Marcus exhales. It wasn't polished. It wasn't eloquent, but it was real. And for the first time, Marcus realized his voice didn't just matter. It was power. The breaking point had come. Not the kind that shatters you, but the kind that cracks the shell you've been trapped in. Marcus wasn't free yet. But for the first time, he wasn't silent either. The morning after the meeting, Marcus woke to something unfamiliar. Not peace, not joy, but the faintest whisper of possibility. The words he had spoken the night before, they echoed in his head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. "I feel like I'm fighting to prove I'm even human." Those words had left his mouth trembling, but they had also landed in the room like a stone in still water, rippling outward, touching others. For the first time, Marcus realized his pain wasn't just his own, it belonged to an entire community. And maybe, just maybe, sharing it could be the beginning of healing. The store was the same, the jeers, the stares, the whispers, unchanged. But Marcus was not the same. He still wore the mask, but now beneath it, something stirred. Resolve. That day he greeted every customer with the same practiced smile. But in his mind, he thought of the meeting, the nods, the tears, the shared humanity. It gave him armor. It gave him strength, a new encounter, A middle-aged black woman, tired from work, fumbling change at his counter. A white man behind her sighs loudly, muttering, "Always so damn slow. Figures." The woman freezes. Her shoulders slump. Normally, Marcus would stay silent. Normally, he would rush, pretend he didn't hear, let the venom slide past unchallenged. But not today. Marcus, steady calm. "Sir, everyone deserves respect here. She's paying just like you. You'll wait your turn." The white man glares, scoffs, but says nothing. The woman looks at Marcus, tears in her eyes, and whispers a soft thank you. It was small, a moment that lasted less than a minute. But for Marcus, it was everything. It was proof that his voice could do more than carry pain. It could protect, it could affirm, it could heal. Scene shift. Marcus back at the community meetings. He speaks more now. People listen. One evening, the facilitator pulls him aside. "Marcus, you've got something powerful in you. You don't just tell your story, you give people courage. Have you thought about leading a group? Something for workers? Like you?" The question startled him. Marcus, a leader? He could barely keep his own life from falling apart. How could he guide anyone else? But that night, lying in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the pain he carried wasn't just a burden? What if it was a blueprint, a map others could follow toward resilience? He didn't call it a meeting. He just said, "Let's talk." And slowly the stories poured out. A young cashier explaining how a customer accused him of theft for scanning too fast. An older janitor sharing how she was passed over for promotion for the third time while training the man who got the job. A stock boy whispering about the times he's followed home at night, always by the same police car. Each story carved a wound into the room, but together they also formed a bond. Marcus listened, Marcus shared, Marcus began to believe. Marcus is now confident. They told us silence was safety, but silence is just another cage. We don't heal by hiding, we heal by telling our truth. We heal by standing together. Nods. A fire ignites in the room. Resilience. Marcus thought it meant toughening up, enduring in silence. But he was learning. True resilience was not silence. It was sound. It was story. It was solidarity. And slowly, the man who once thought his life was invisible was becoming impossible to ignore. The cashier who once thought he had nothing but a paycheck was beginning to discover he had something greater, a voice, a community, and the first fragile seeds of healing. The more Marcus spoke, the more he discovered his own strength. But strength always comes with a price. For every coworker who thanked him, there was another who rolled their eyes. For every customer who smiled back at him with respect, there was another who sneered, their prejudice sharpened now like a blade. And for his boss, his words were not inspiration. They were disruption. The said boss said, "Marcus, enough with the pep talks. You're not a preacher. You're not a leader. You're a cashier. So do your job and leave the rest alone." Awkward silence. A few coworkers look down, afraid. Marcus swallows his anger, forces a smile. The sting was familiar, a reminder of where they believed he belonged. Behind a counter, behind silence. But Marcus knew now he couldn't go back. Later that night, Marcus journals, his handwriting shaky, smudged from tears. He wrote, "If speaking truth makes me a problem, then maybe I was born to be one." At the store the next day, a confrontation begins. A white customer loudly accuses Marcus of giving her the wrong change. Her voice is sharp, cutting. The customer was angry. "You people always trying to cheat. You think I don't notice?" The store goes silent, eyes turn. Marcus feels the old burn, the urge to shrink, to apologize, to vanish. But then he remembers the group, their faces, their stories. He straightens his back. "Ma'am, I gave you the exact change. I will not allow you to disrespect me. Not today." A hush falls. The woman sputters, throws her bag over her shoulder, storms out. The boss, watching from the side, looks furious. But behind Marcus, a young black stock boy grins, eyes shining with pride. For every storm, there was a spark. And Marcus was learning. Resilience often meant standing tall in the middle of both. Scene shift, community meeting at night. Marcus tells the story. The room listens, nods, claps. But then, a man in the back speaks up. Older man said, "You talk brave, son, but I've seen this before. Speak too loud and they'll break you down. Fire you, blacklist you. You think you're helping us? Sometimes you're just painting a bigger target on our backs." The room grows quiet. Marcus feels the weight of those words. He wants to argue, but he can't. Because deep down, he fears the man is right. That night, Marcus walked home slower than usual, each streetlight casting shadows that felt heavier than the last. He wondered, was he lifting his people up or leading them into danger? His mother's voice enters, a memory. The sound of her laughter in the kitchen years ago, her hands stained with flour as she cooked. His mother said, "Marcus, baby, sometimes silence keeps you safe. But silence also keeps you small. You've got to decide, do you want safe or do you want free?" The memory hit him like scripture, and Marcus realized he was already too far from safe to turn back. A week later, Marcus arrives at the store and finds a memo taped to the break room wall. Any discussion of race, protests, or politics on store property will result in termination. His co-workers whisper, eyes darting toward him. The system had noticed, and it was striking back. His meetings, his voice, his defiance. It had rattled the walls of their comfort, and now they wanted to silence him for good. But Marcus was done being silent. He ripped the memo down, stuffed it in his pocket, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the fight. The cashier they tried to shrink into invisibility was beginning to outgrow the walls around him. And as the fight drew closer, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The cost of silence was far greater than the cost of resistance. The storm outside was only a reflection of the storm inside. Marcus had been called into the office, the one place every employee feared. His boss sat behind the desk, arms folded, eyes sharp like daggers. On the desk lay a stack of papers, incident reports, complaints, memos. "Boss, Marcus, you've become a distraction. You're turning shifts into speeches. You're agitating customers. You're making management uncomfortable. This isn't what we hired you for." Marcus sat there, silent at first, his hands clenched on his knees. Every word stung, not because it was true, but because it was expected. Expected of him to shrink, expected of him to apologize, expected of him to bow. But this time, Marcus did not bow. Marcus immediately said, "What you hired me for was to scan groceries, and I do that. What I will not do is scan away my dignity. I have a right to speak, a right to exist in this space with respect. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe the problem isn't me." You're suspended. Effective immediately. Clean out your locker. The words hit like a slap. Suspended. No paycheck, no security, no shield for his mother who still relied on him. But as Marcus walked out that door, he wasn't walking in shame. He was walking in fire. Marcus outside the store, rain soaking his shirt. He holds the suspension notice in his hand, crushed and dripping. A coworker rushes out behind him. Jamal, the young stock boy who had looked up to him earlier. "Marcus, yo man, I heard. This ain't right. They can't just do you like that." Marcus looks at him, his jaw trembling, torn between anger and exhaustion. "They just did, and they'll keep doing it unless we stop them." Marcus at home, bills piling up, his mother's worried eyes watching him. Marcus pacing his small apartment, voice rising in frustration as he practices speeches aloud. Marcus returning to community meetings, fire in his voice, telling them what happened. Suspension wasn't the end. It was gasoline, and Marcus was the match. His story spread through whispers, through late-night conversations at kitchen tables, through coworkers who've seen too much for too long. And what began as one man's punishment started to sound like a community's rallying cry. A community meeting grows larger. More people fill the room than ever before. Older women nod with arms crossed, young men sit forward, eyes blazing. A local journalist is even present, scribbling notes. Marcus stands in the middle, his voice carrying more power than he thought possible. "Marcus, they suspended me because I spoke, because I refused to stay silent. But this isn't about me. It's about every one of us who's ever been told to know our place. Every one of us who's been punished for existing too boldly. Every one of us who's been made small. I won't be small anymore, and neither should you." Applause erupts. Feet stomp against the floor. The sound of collective strength fills the space. For the first time, Marcus felt it. The shift. The weight he carried alone was no longer just his. It was shared. It was echoed. It was alive in the voices around him. The next morning, Marcus walks by the store. To his shock, several co-workers are outside, picket signs in their hands, makeshift written with markers. "Respect our voices. We are not invisible. Justice for Marcus." They tried to break him. Instead, they woke the others. Marcus stood at the edge of the sidewalk, rain still dripping from the awnings, watching as the place that once silenced him was now surrounded by noise, a noise of resistance, of solidarity. And for the first time, he wondered if this was bigger than a job, bigger than a paycheck, bigger than a cashier. This was a movement. Marcus holding a soggy sign in his hand, raising it high as he joins the others. The rain pours, but he smiles. The storm isn't over, but now he isn't facing it alone. The breaking point had come, but instead of breaking Marcus, it was breaking the silence. Every storm runs out of rain, and after months of fighting, shouting, marching, and standing, Marcus stood in the middle of a quiet street at dawn, wondering if it had all been worth it. The store never rehired him. The suspension had quietly turned into termination. The paycheck was gone. The routine was gone. The name tag, the counter, the beep of groceries, all of it, gone. But something else had been born in its place. A small community hall, wooden chairs, folding tables, flyers taped to the wall that read, "Workers have a voice." Marcus stands at the front, speaking, not to hundreds, but to a dozen, and yet the energy feels bigger than any stadium. What began with one man's silence and one man's humiliation behind a register had grown into a circle of voices. People who worked night shifts in warehouses, single mothers juggling 2 jobs, young men tired of being followed in stores, elders who remembered fights of the past. They all carried scars, and now they carried them together. Marcus. They thought I was small. They thought I was just a cashier, but this movement we've built proves none of us are small. Every name tag, every mop, every counter, every late night shift, it all carries worth. And it's time they saw it. Applause fills the room. Someone shouts, "Preach!" Another slams their hand on the table in agreement. The energy is alive. The fight wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines on every network, but it changed lives. The grocery store, months later, after enough walkouts, enough shifts left uncovered, enough community pressure, policies shifted. Mandatory anti-discrimination training, anonymous reporting lines for harassment, promotions for workers of color who had been overlooked for years. Was it perfect? No, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks let the light through. Marcus with his mother sitting on the porch, the sun setting behind them. She holds his hand, her eyes full of quiet pride. "Mother, you did good, baby. Your daddy would be proud." Silence. Marcus swallows hard, blinking back tears. He looks out at the street, kids riding bikes, laughter in the air. For Marcus, it was never just about the job. It was about the boy who once felt invisible in a corner store, the man who once swallowed insults behind a counter, the community that once thought silence was the only way to survive. Now their voices had been freed. A younger worker approaches Marcus outside a community meeting. A kid, no older than Marcus was when he first started at the grocery store. Nervous, fidgeting, but hopeful. "Young man, Mr. Marcus? I wanted to say thank you. I work nights at the station down the road. They used to treat me like I didn't exist. But after what you did, they listen now. So thank you." Marcus pauses, touched beyond words. He places a hand on the young man's shoulder, nodding. "Don't thank me. Just promise me one thing. When it's your turn, you don't stay silent either." And with that, the story came full circle. From a cashier counter to a community's cry, to a legacy that could not be erased. Marcus lost his job, but he found his voice. And in finding his voice, he gave countless others the courage to find theirs. This is the story of Marcus, a black man, a cashier, a son, a fighter. He was never small, and neither are you, because every voice matters, every stand echoes, and every act of resilience plants a seed that grows beyond the walls that once tried to contain it. This is not the end. It is only the beginning.